Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I am Arley, and this is my first live stream here on my YouTube channel. And the idea here is to show you how to create your first REST API using Spring Boot 3. We're also going to use Postgres, which is our database that we're going to connect, and we're going to map an entity for your database, and then we're going to store data and also retrieve data from the database. So this is of course a video. It's a practical video that I'm going to show you how to create your application step by step. And let's go to the code, and I hope you enjoy it. If you have any question, you can let me know in the comments. So if you're watching in a moment in the future, you also can ask me questions. Let me know in the comments below. And of course, I'm going to answer everybody. Okay, so let's get started here. I'm gonna show you share my display here. Just a second. So after that, I'm going to create our project. Oops, sorry, I changed the screen. It's this one in here. All right, so this is my idea. So I'm using IntelliJ, and I'm going to create a Spring Boot application here and show you how to create your application. We're gonna explore a lot of features in Spring Boot framework, okay? All right, so let's get started here. First, we're gonna click here in New Project, and you can see that because I'm using IntelliJ Ultimate, I can see a few options here like Java, Kotlin, and a lot of different type of projects that I can create here. And if you're not using this IDE, you can use, for example, STS, which is the IDE based on Eclipse. And you also can, for example, use the Spring Start IO that you can create your own application. You can select all the dependencies you need, everything you need, and then you just export and open the project on your IDE. Okay. So first we need to create to give a name of our project. Let's call sales API, which will be an API for handling sales project, for example, products, orders, customers, and everything. Of course, that because the idea here is to start in Spring Boot, so we won't be able to create all the entities because it will take a long time to do that, and I'm going to increase all this content later on here on the channel. Okay, so let's call sales API. After that, we're not going to change here the path for now. It doesn't matter for now. So we need to make sure that we're going to choose Java application as our language. And in the type here, we need to make sure that we're going to create a Maven project. Okay, so Maven is the repository that allows to control every dependency that we need. So we don't need to download one by one, and of course you help us with all of the dependencies that we need on our project. Okay, so the artifact ID we can maintain here. We can keep this name like sales API. We need to make sure also the version of the Java version we need. In this case, I already got the 17, the Java 17 set up on my computer, but here inside your IntelliJ, you could use different versions because you can set up on the project settings. Okay, so after that, we need to make sure that we're going to use jar instead of war. So jar stands for the Java archived. So which means that our application will be running using embedded Tomcat. If we choose to, for example, create our project as a web application archive here, we will have some trouble because we need to install and deploy our application inside an application server like JBoss or Wildfly, or for example download and set up Apache Tomcat. Okay, so we choose here, and after that we just need to create our project here. There is this other property that you can choose, because as you know here, you can choose your application settings to be a property file or an YAML. Okay, so basically we're going to use YAML file for now, the application properties for now, and we're going to create the project. So click next, and here we need to select all the dependencies that we need for now. Okay, so the first one we need is Spring Web, because that's the dependency on Spring Boot that allows us to create REST APIs and all the structure that we need in Spring Boot to allow us to create REST controllers, everything we need about the web context. So first I search here for web, and there is another item that we need to be careful with that, because maybe 3 or 2 months ago, the new version of Spring Boot was released, which was the Spring Boot 4. But we're not going to use Spring Boot 4 for now. We're gonna actually use the last stable version in the Spring Boot 3 release. So we have here the 3.5.10. That's the version we're gonna choose. After that, we're gonna choose here Spring Web, that will allows us to create a API REST, and then we're gonna need a few things here, because we're going to connect into a database, which will be a Postgres SQL. So for that, the first thing we need is the Spring Data JPA. What is that? It's the Java persistence language that we're going to use to create connections, allows us to map our entities to become our tables, that allows us, the JPA also gives us a lot of methods that we can use to search data, save, and a lot of information, a lot of methods that are already ready to go inside the JPA. So let's search for JPA here, and we can check the Spring Data JPA here. All right, is already selected. And another thing that we can choose here, because we're going to connect into a database, we need the database driver. So we're gonna search for Postgres here. So we have here let's Postgres, and we can see that we also have here Postgres driver. Okay, so that's what we need. And for avoid a lot of boilerplate, we're gonna choose Lombok in here also, because Lombok will help us to create clean classes for us, because we don't need to use getter and setters. And I just click to finish. And by that, after that, let me get here the screen. Okay, the project was successfully created here. We have a few informations here that the IntelliJ tries to warn us, or to show a little bit of information like tips that we can allow in our project, enable in our project. So basically we don't need much. We just created our project, and here, as you can see, we have the project structure. We have the .xml here. That's where we can set up a new libraries, new dependencies, and we have here a few dependencies that we added, like the Spring Boot tests. We have the Lombok dependency, also the Postgres, and we have JPA, a lot of dependencies that we added, and of course the Spring Boot on dependencies here. So, okay, so if we try to run our project, because we are using JPA, we're going to get an error, because it will try to locate the database and it won't be able to find. So we need to set up our connection to our database. So first, let's understand a little bit here. We have source, and under source we have main, and we have Java and our package, and here is our main class that allows us to run our project. So first, let's try to run our project first here. it will throw an error because of our database connection. It will try to connect to a database and there is nothing, and they will say that failed to locate the data source URL in here. Okay, so now we're going to set up our database connection. So you may ask me, how can we do that? So to set up our database connection, we click here on our inside our resources here. So here we have the application properties. As you can see, the only information that it's here right now is the application name, which is the same application name that we set up on our project. Okay, all right, so after that we're gonna connect to a database. Let me open here our database IDE here, so we could create a new database here. So I have, let me check. Oh, okay, I need to open the Beaver. Let's open here, which will allows us to create and check all of database that are available. Okay, right now here, so we have the Postgres connection here, and we're going to create a new database here. So I have basically 3 databases, but we're going to create another one. So right click, create new database. We're gonna call like sales, it will be our database name, and let's just use here sales database. Okay, our database is now created. We're not going to change the schema here, we're gonna use the public. So it's basically the default schema inside Postgres. And now we can get back to our API here, our project, and I'm gonna add the configuration in here. So we need the data source configurations. So this is very simple configurations that we use in basically all of databases connections that we need. It doesn't matter if it is Postgres or OracleDB or MongoDB, it doesn't matter. So here, how can I connect to a database? So basically we need to set up our data source URL, which we need to inform that we're going to use JDBC, Postgres, then this is the server. So I'm using localhost here. So if I'm trying to connect to a remote database, I just need to inform the IP address of the server. And this is the default port for Postgres, 5432. If you're running your database in another port, just change it here. And here is the database name. And here we have the username for the database. This is an installation that I have on my own computer, so it's a local installation. And when you install the Postgres SQL, basically you have the default username and password. In my case is Postgres and Postgres, the username and password. Of course, never do that in production. Always create passwords, different passwords for different environments when you're using Spring profiles. So in your development environment, you use a different password from the production. And of course that this username and password here, it shouldn't be, you definitely do not do that in production, for example, to set up in your own application properties. Usually we use the operating system variables to store our passwords, and here we just call that the project will look for the environment variables inside your operating system. Okay, so this is basically what you need. There is 3 other information that is very important, so you can add as a setting on our project, which is the JPA Hibernate setting that allows us to create the database, the tables and columns, everything directly from our application, which is basically these 3 lines here. Actually, it's just 1 line, but we use these other lines here to set up, and I'm going to explain one by one. First, we have the JPA Hibernate DDL auto, so which means we're going to use update. What it means is when we run the project and we have a new entity in our project, it will synchronize with the database tables. So DDL stands for data definition language. So it's basically our create table or alter table, anything which changes the definition of our database. And we saying that is update because we can also have the create and none or a few options here, but we're gonna use update, so it will synchronize the changes we made in our entities. So in the last one, this second one here, it's basically to show the SQL in our console here. So when we run a query, it will show us because it will make easier for us to understand what is going on. But that's very important information here. Also, do not activate the show SQL in production, okay? Because it will generate a lot of logs, and it's not healthy because it will generate a lot of logs, and of course that you need the observability of your project to be clean as possible, okay? And this one is just to format the SQL here in the console. So if this is false, it won't matter this last one here. Okay, so what else? What is the next step for us to create our API REST? Let's run the project here. If we run the project, technically it will work and it will already detect our database, which is this one here. It already detected our database. It's saying that I'm using database version 16.11. So that's the local database, the local installation that I have here in my computer. And with that, it means that our database is already connected and it's working perfectly. Our project is up and we can start creating our entity. All right. So let's stop here the project, and we're going to create a new entity here, which will be a Java class. I'm going to create a new package. So we click inside the main package here and right click, new, we have package, and a new package, we're gonna create a package called entity. So here we're going to create the class, the Java class that are a representation of our database table. So if you have a table called products, so we're going to create a new class, Java class, and then product. Okay, so this is the product class. And how can I specify that this class, it will be a representation of our database table? To do that, we need a few information, and the first one is the entity annotation here. So at entity, as you can see, the entity it comes from Jakarta persistence. We need to be careful with that. Of course, that in this case there is only this entity, this annotation, but it could have a lot of different ones based on your project dependencies. And also, it's very interesting to use the table annotation, which will allows us to change the name of the table for the name that we need or we desire. Okay, so here, after the table, we can use parentheses here, and then we can just change the name and use the name that we want. As you can see, it's a singular name like product, but in the database, we use plural. So we're gonna call products. Oh, sorry, it's something wrong here. Yeah, products. All right, that's the name of the database, our table inside our database. And right now we're going to create. Oh, give me just a second. Let me just change my screen here. Okay, screen changed. Okay, perfect. All right, so after that we need a few information that is very important for every single table that you have. It's very important to create a unique column in your table that will be able to identify as a unique record. Okay, so to do that, we use a annotation called ID. So this ID will help. It's used to say that this is a identification. So remember to call for to choose the persistence one, and you're gonna create a private long ID. That's the name of the column I'm gonna create, the attribute here. And we also need to say something like, oh, how is this identification is going to be handled by the database? So to do that, we need to set up a generated value. It's a generated value because it will say to the database how this attribute or this column will be incremented to never store identifications duplicated. For example, if I have a product, this product, for example, has the ID number 1. So if I insert another one, it should be the 2, then 3, 4. So it never get the same number, the same value, the same attribute for more than one row. Okay, so to do that, we use the generated value. So it's in a notation called generated value here, and in the generated value we have the strategy. What is this strategy? How am I going to increment this ID? We have the identity. What it means is the Java is going to give the entire responsibility to increment this attribute for the database. So the database will create automatically something called sequence, and a sequence you'll be able to every time I try to insert a new record, a new row inside the table, it will check what was the last number used inside this record. So the row is, if is 0, it will get the next one, it's 1, then 2, and etc. But we also could use sequence. If we choose to use sequence, that means that our project will handle the sequence, and with that we need to create a few more detail and information that we need to set here when using sequence. But we don't need to do that because that's our first project. We don't need to be go ahead ourselves to create a very complex project. So after that, we can create different columns here. Let's create private string, and let's call the name of the product, and let's create also, I don't need a description, let's just create a private string, not a string, actually let's create an integer. Let's create just the price. Let's minimize the amount, the quantity of fields that we're going to use here. So let's create a private and then big decimal. What is big decimal? The big decimal, it's a type of data here in Java that allows us to work with monetization values. For example, if you need to store price, then you need to make a few operations, math operations, then it's a very good idea to use big decimal because you have rounds. You can round up, round down. You can work with these operations easily. And so we're gonna choose big decimal, and that's important to check that big decimal, it comes from Java math, not Java lang as string, like strings or long or this other type of data. So this is very important to check because to notice, because it's kind of a Java certification question that Oracle puts on the exam that you need to take to get your certification certificate. Okay, so here we're gonna call price, and for our project, basically we're going to create three attributes here: ID, the name of the product, and also the price of the product. So what will happen when I run the project? So here, let's just refresh our database and check what is inside our database right now. So I'm gonna click here, and in our database it's called sales. Let's refresh. After that, we're gonna click here in public tables, and there is nothing here in tables yet. So let's run the project. I'm gonna click here to run the project. Okay. Oh, look, the database was identified here because we added the configuration inside our application properties, and now, as you can see, the table was created inside our database, and then the ID was assigned as primary key. So if we got back here in our database and refresh here, let's just refresh, and as you can see, we have the product table here with 3 attributes, and of course that's the mark here that this is a primary key inside our ID. Okay, so now we have a table, and this table is mapped inside our project, and we can create and you can edit and delete everything that we can do in this table. We can use Java for that because we're going to use JPA interfaces to allows us to create operations in here. So but that's something missing here, because we created our class, but we did not add the getter and setters for our class, our attributes, because we're using private. So we need to add getters and setters here, and one way to do that is to, for example, click here, right click here and click generate, and then we could click here in generate getters and setters and select everyone, and then okay, and now we have public methods to access all the attributes inside our class. But we added Lombok to our project. So what it does, it means that we don't need to add a lot of these these methods here. So because if we use like this, every single class, every single entity we create, or DTOs to return data, we need to create getter and setters because we're using private to our attributes. So instead of using all of this code here, we could make our class more clean. And how can we do that? We just add here the annotations for Lombok. For example, we could use data that includes getter, setters, toString, and other methods. But instead of that, let's just use what we need, which is getter. We also need setters to add the data into our attributes. Setter, getter, setter, and we also going to add another one here, which is the constructor, because the same way we create the getter and setter, we could create our constructor, which will be more code in here, so it's not clean. And so with that we can add all args constructor, which means it will create a constructor with all of the attributes in our class. And we also can add a no args constructor, which means that it's like our default constructor when we're not using a constructor with fields. Basically, when you create our project with getter and setters, we have a default constructor, which is the constructor with no fields, that allows us to create a new instances of our class with new. For example, product new product. It will allow us to create a instance, a object, which is a instance of our class. But in this case, now we have both constructors here. So that being said, now we can continue here by creating our repository. What is that? We mapped our entity here with our database table, which means that everything that is here, our attributes, everything is mapped to our database table. So now we can create a JpaRepository interface that allows us to interact with our database assigned to this table, to this entity. For example, we can save a new data without creating SQL queries inside our project. And we could fetch data like find all, find by ID. We could update, we could delete, and everything. We can use JpaRepository interface to do that. So for that, we need to create here a new interface, and to help us, let's just create another package here. Let's call repository. Okay, new package. Let's just type in here. Okay, so this is the package we're going to add our interfaces. And let's right click here, new Java class. Let's call product repository. And instead we choose class, we need to choose interface. So when we are creating interfaces, it means that we cannot implement methods in here. So the only thing that you can add here is basically the method signature. What is that? It means that we can create here a method, but we cannot add blocks of code inside the method. So for now, the only thing we need to do, because the JpaRepository will allow us to interact with the database directly with methods that are already allows us to create this. So, but to allow this, we need to extends. So we're going to inherit every information from the JpaRepository. So let's check in JpaRepository. And we need to say something like, oh, when I create an instance of this repository, I'm going to manipulate data inside the specific entity. In this case, we're going to manipulate data for product. And the other parameter that JpaRepository needs is the type of data of our primary key inside our entity. So we need to be careful with that, because if I click here, let's click here, as you can see, the ID annotation here, which is @ID. @ID means that this field here is the primary key of our table. So it's representing the primary key in our table. And when we create the interface, we need to say, we need to specify that the primary key of our entity, it is long, which is the database type, the data type of our long ID. Okay, so now we can get back here because we extended, so everything that it is in the JpaRepository, which the inherited for information for another ones, yet, and etc. Now, when we create an instance of product repository, we will be able to access the methods that JPA already brings us to make it more easier. Okay, so now we have our repository and we're going to create our service. What is the service? A service is a class that is managed by Spring Boot, and we can we can add an instance here using our constructor, and we can, for example, save data, we can update, we can delete, everything we can do from the instance of our repository. So let me close everything in here to make more organized here. And the same thing that I did about the repository, about the entity, I'm going to create a new package here. So right click here and new Java class. And now I'm going to create, let's create the package first. New package, and then we're gonna call service. And now we're going to right click in here and create the Java class that we need here. So let's call it product service. It's very interesting to use the same name here at the end, because when you create instances in the different places, you'll be able to identify easier the package that it's coming from. All right. So let's create a service. Yeah. All right. So now, after creating our service, we can. Yeah. So the first thing we need to do here is we need to annotate. Let me stop. Project is running. Let's stop it. And the first thing we need to do here is to annotate our class, because this class, it will be managed by Spring Boot. So to do that, we're gonna add a annotation called service. Okay, so this means that the Spring Boot we're going to the Spring Boot will manage the instance of this class. So if you insert something, inject something wrong when you're starting the project, the Spring Boot will also verify and throw an error. Okay, so now we can create an instance of our JPA repository that it will be our product repository. So to do that, let's just add here private final and our product repository. And automatically the IDE here will ask us to add inside a constructor. Okay, they created a constructor for our service, but again, we're using Lombok to help us avoiding constructors, getter and setters and everything. So we're going to remove this, and instead of creating a specific constructor here, we just need to add annotation here called required args constructor. So automatically the Lombok will be able to create dynamically, I mean, when we're building the project, our constructor. Okay, so now we can create a method that allows us to save an product inside our database. To do that, we're gonna create a public method. Let's create a public method here. Let's return a product, which is our entity, and we're gonna call the method, we're gonna call save. To save a data, we need to receive the product object, and then we just return here. What is going on here? Let me explain. Let me explain here. Let's just here. Because I'm using an instance of product repository, and product repository extends of JPA repository. It means that when I'm using an instance of the product repository, a few methods will available for us that will interact with our database automatically. So we have save method, we have a lot of method that is for us to fetch data, like find all, it will return a list of products. We have find by ID, we will return in a optional, which is from the package Java util. And we have a lot of methods here. So we also have delete, when we need to delete an row from our database. We have a lot of methods in here, and we also can create a lot of different methods using derived queries here in our interface. But for now, we're gonna use this save method here to create a new row in our database. And also we're going to create a new method here, which will be the find all. So let's retrieve all rows from our database. To do that, let's create a public key, and then we're gonna use list. We need to be careful with the import from list. It lists from java.java.util. So here we're gonna use here, and this way we retrieve all the information we need. So I gave the name find all, and then we use the product repository dot find all. So we will be accessing the method that retrieves all information from the database. All right, so this now we created an entity, we create our repository, we create our service. Now we need to create our controller. So the controller is the entry point of our API REST, which means that our customer or our HTTP client will send a request to our controller, and then the controller will send to our service. And to do that, let's create our class. So let's create here a new Java class. Let's create first our package so we can organize our project. So let's create package here and let's call it controller. And inside the controller, now we're going to create our Java class. So let's create here new Java class and we're gonna call it product controller. Product controller. So okay, so to make sure our controller is indeed our entry point of our API REST, we need a few annotations here. The first one, it must be the REST controller. What is the REST controller? Just to make sure here, some different approach here. Spring Boot runs on top of the Spring Framework. So Spring Framework, it's not just for API REST. You also create web applications in the traditional way, like the SSR application with server-side rendering. And with that, we have controller and we have REST controller. The controller means that we're going to return, for example, a response, like a view, for example, in a HTML page or something like that. But when you're using REST controller, basically we are saying that we have a response or a response body attached to our response. So we use REST controller. So this, you make sure that our class here, it will be returning JSON. Okay, it will be returning JSON. And we need another one here, which is the request mapping. What is the request mapping does? Request mapping, we are saying that the request mapping that this class, this REST controller, it's under a specific URL, which could be, for example, products. So products. All right. So when somebody sends us a request for our API, when after the context, for example, the 8080 we're going to redirect to the URL that starts with products. And here, when we do that, we have to create a few methods that it's connected to the type of HTTP request that our application is receiving. For example, in get, HTTP get, HTTP post, put, delete, and etc. But first, our service is the class that we need to inject here. So we could use that methods like save and find out that we just created. So let's add here private final, and let's create our product service here, product service. All right. And of course that we're using final. So we need to add to our constructor, but we are using longbox, so we just need to use the annotation for required args constructor here. And now we need to create our methods, and the first method we're going to create is a post mapping. So we're gonna attach our method to the request type of post, HTTP post. So post, it's a HTTP method that it's used to create a new resource inside our API REST. So we're going to receive an information and we're going to persist inside our database, for example. So we're going to receive a payload. For example, we're going to receive a JSON in our request body. So we're gonna create a public, and there is a few information that is very interesting to add here, because we need to control the entire response that we're going to provide to our customer, to our client. So to do that, we need to use something called response entity. Response entity allows us to, for example, return an information to our client. And this information we could add, for example, the HTTP code. For example, we need to add a 200 for success, 201 for created, 204 to say that it's a no content response, and so on. So just a second. Okay, I'm back. So we need to, for example, let me create the method, and then we explore the possibilities. Okay, so we have here the response entity. So let's choose response entity, and we need here to say something, what kind of data we're going to return. So in this case, we're going to return a product. We're going to return a product, and we're going to call it save. It will be the save method here, and we need to receive the request body to be saved into our database. So we need to receive our product from our request. And how can we do that? First, we're gonna create here a product object, product and product. Okay, so but how can I extract the request JSON from my request and add into my variable called product, which is the type of product, which is the entity type that we created? To do that, we use an annotation here called request body, like this one here, request body. So it means that the JSON that we got from the request, it's going to be parsed inside our variable here automatically, and then we're going to call the product service and access the save passing our variable. And we need to return something. Usually when we are creating, or when we're using a post mapping that is going to create a new row inside our database, we return a response entity 201, which is the created method. So we can just return here, and then we're gonna use response entity. Oops, sorry, I selected the wrong response. We're gonna return an response entity dot point status. Here we can choose, let me finish here, and then we just sorry, product. I'm gonna just add here the entire, just a second, let me remove this with the line here, cut, and here let's just paste in here. So what's going on here? We're going to receive a payload, which is our JSON from our request. We're gonna parse inside our product here, and we're gonna send it to our service that we will use the repository to save definitely in our database. So, but in the HTML response here, we need to say that we're going to return an created, which is, let me click here. As you can see, that's the HTTP code for our created here. Okay, so when somebody send us a post to create a new product, we're going to return this code, this HTTP code, as a response. All right, so and the last method that we need here for now is to return all the information that we saved inside our database. So we're going to use the get mapping here. So we get mapping, and here we're gonna return response entity, and we're going to return a OK, which is, let's just, let me zoom in here just to make sure to make it more visible here. So we're going to return a response entity of a list of products, which comes from util, and we called the method we called find all, and then we're going to return a HTTP 200 to make sure that it's a successful request. We also could do things a little bit different, because in this response entity we also have the OK, which is directly, and we don't need to use this body here, so just need to use like this, and this way our project is supposed to work perfectly. Let's run the project here and see if is everything all right here. Okay, the project, oops, sorry, let me, okay, the project is running perfectly, but for us to send a request to our API REST, we need a HTTP client, for example, Postman, Insomnia, or something like that. But we have something very interesting, because we can use the Spring Doc, which is the API documentation that we can add to our project, and it will make more easier for us just to work with JSON without creating manually the JSON and send a request. So to activate the Spring Doc inside our application, we just come here to our .xml. Let's open here, open XML. I'm going to add the Spring Doc dependency here. So let's locate here, dependency. Above the dependencies here, it's the end here. So let's add this one here. Let's save. I'm going to click here to update our .xml, and by doing that, it's already available a few options. There's a new URL that we can access and be able to use our documentation. So now let's just play here. Let's run the project. Okay, project is running. I'm gonna get here and browser tab here for us to access. So let's call localhost. Oops. Oh, sorry, my keyboard has changed here apparently, because I use a shortcut. Let me change back here, just a second. Okay. So now we can access local, and then we have this Swagger UI here, and that's the final URL to open the Spring Doc API, which basically is this Swagger documentation here. So this is the full Spring Doc that we allowed, that is running in our project by default. We can change these informations here using a Open API bean configuration. We can change a few things here. So now we can create these requests directly from our documentation to test it out our project. So the first thing here, we're going to create a post. Let's just click here and try it out. First, let's check it out, all the products in the project. Let's click here, and you can see that the 200 here is returned, which is an empty list. There is no data inside here our database. So let's create the first one, try it out, and as you can see, the documentation already brought us here the entire JSON we need. So let's remove what we don't need to pass to send. Let's create a name for our product. Let's call SSD, for example, 200 500 gigabytes, for example. It's just a product. Let's say that it's something like, I don't know, maybe $100, for example. And let's just send. Click here in execute. Okay, we executed, and let's see. Okay, we got the result. That's the result that we want, and that's the JSON that we want. And it also got the ID number 1. Okay, so let's save another one. So let's just click here and let's change the name and the price of a new product here. Let's zoom in. Let's, I don't know, maybe create a new one called, for example, laptop. Let's create a laptop, and let's add a price, I don't know, maybe $500. It's okay. It's just for testing, okay? So I executed, and now we have another record, another row in our database. And let's just execute the get mapping, the method that retrieve all data, which is a HTTP get. And let's click here again. And as you can see, you have the curl here, this URL that you can, for example, import the entire request for your REST client, your HTTP client. We have the entire URL here, and we here all have the data inside our database. So we have 2 records in our database, and it's every record is here. And let's check it out. How is the database? So here we have our database, and let me close here. Let's open again. It's closed. Let's click in our database. It's called sales. Let's refresh it, and now we're going to double click here, and as you can see, the database is with the same data that we send over the Swagger to our application. So now let's check it out, our application console. Because we said in our application properties here that we're going to show the SQL from our every query that is submitted, send it to our database. We're going to format and we're going to show it. So now, as you can see, the entire SQL query is here. First, we selected something, which was the first, we ran the list all from the Swagger, and now we have the insert intro, we have another insert intro, and then we listed everything. So if I click here and clean all, and then try to retrieve again, there's another retrieve. And there is another SQL code, SQL query here in our console. So basically, we created our project. We created our entity, which is mapped to our database table called products. We created attributes. We said that our ID was our primary key, which is the identification, the unique identification for our table rows. And we created a repository, which is we extended from JpaRepository that allows us to use a few methods like fetch data, save data. We have a lot of methods that are allowed in here. And we created our service class, which you'll be able to save, to find all records, for example, to fetch all data, to save a new data. And we created the controller to do that. So we retrieve when somebody sends a request to products, and it is a post mapping and send us a request body. We're going to persist this data inside our database. And here, using get mapping, we said that when somebody sends a get to our URL, we're going to retrieve all information from the database and add to the response of the request. So basically, we created our first API REST from scratch here. We created the entire project, connected to the database, which is the Postgres SQL. That's what the database, the connection that we are setting up here. So we are connecting to a local installation of Postgres running in this default port, which is 5432. That's the default port. If you have another database running in a network or in a remote, in a remote computer, you just need to add here the IP address and then the port, and of course the database name that you're going to connect. All right, so basically we finished our first API project here. If you have any question, just let me know in the comments. You can also check all the content that we have already have in the channel. Of course, that I'm starting this channel. So the idea here is to share knowledge across the world about Java, especially in web, for example, for mobile developers using Flutter, for example, and also Angular. The entire developer area I've been working on, and I'm going to share knowledge here in my channel. So stay tuned. Subscribe to my channel, let your comment below, and that's it, guys. If you have any question, just let me know, and that's it. Thank you for the support, and thank you for being here live with me.